She said my grandfather drowned. The letters in the attic told a different story. I've rewritten this post at least 10 times. Every version sounds too dramatic or not dramatic enough. Maybe because no version of the truth really fits into words. But after what I found, I can't carry it alone anymore. This isn't about revenge or pity. It's about finally telling the story my family buried for 30 years. I never meant to come back here. But when someone dies, the past doesn't ask for permission. It just opens the door and waits for you to step through. My grandmother slipped away last winter. Quietly, a sigh in her sleep, a soft rustle of sheets, and the faint trace of lavender that lingered for days. Everyone in town said the same thing. She was an angel, and maybe she was. An angel with flower on her hands and a secret stitched into her smile. After the funeral, I drove to her house by the river. The place looked smaller than I remembered, but heavier somehow, like the walls had learned to hold their breath. Frost bloomed along the windows. Inside, everything was too still. The smell of cedar and old perfume wrapped around me like a memory that didn't want to let go. I told myself I was there to help my mother pack. But truthfully, I just wanted one last moment of pretending nothing had changed. Mom was downstairs sorting dishes when I climbed the attic steps. Each creak sounded like a warning. The air grew colder, sharper, the way it does before a storm. Boxes everywhere, tax papers, Christmas ornaments, yellowed magazines. And then behind an old trunk draped with a moth-eaten quilt, I saw it. A small wooden chest, its corners worn smooth, its brass latch dulled with time. 2 letters carved into the lid, shallow but deliberate, H+M. I remember calling down, "Hey Mom, there's something up here." Footsteps on the stairs, then her face, pale as the dust swirling in the flashlight beam. She stared at the chest like it was alive. "Put it back," she whispered. I laughed. "What? It's just a box." Her voice cracked. "Please, don't open that." Then she turned and walked away, leaving the attic light trembling in its socket. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house seemed to come from above. The slow settling of beams, a distant thump, a whisper that might have been my name. I told myself I was imagining it, but the thought of that box gnawed at me until midnight. Finally, I gave in. The attic air hit me like cold breath. Dust floated in the beam of my flashlight, tiny ghosts spinning through the dark. I knelt beside the chest, fingers tracing the carved initials. The latch wouldn't budge, but when I felt beneath the lid, something brushed my fingertips. Tape. A small key rusted, hidden but not lost. It slid into the lock as if it had been waiting. The click was quiet, almost relieved. Inside were letters, dozens, bound by a ribbon faded from red to brown. The scent of old paper rose like perfume from another century. Ink bled into cursive loops, fragile, secret handwriting. I unfolded the first page. "My dearest Em, the nights feel longer without you. The river is calm tonight. It feels like it's waiting for us. Signed simply, Harold." My breath caught, because my grandfather's name was Henry. I stared at the signature again, the graceful H, the heavy final line. Not a typo, a name. Someone else. Who the hell was Harold? The flashlight flickered, and for a heartbeat the shadows moved. It felt as if the whole house exhaled, as if the truth had been waiting for someone foolish enough to listen. I closed the lid, but the letters stayed in my hands. Their weight wasn't much, yet somehow it pressed straight through my chest. Downstairs, the grandfather clock struck 12, and in that sound, I swear I heard the river outside, slow, steady, whispering the same question that's been with me ever since. What did my grandmother do? I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those letters, thin paper, trembling cursive, like veins running across the past. By dawn, I was still at the kitchen table, the box beside my coffee cup, the key glinting like a dare. I told myself I'd read just one more. Then I'd stop. But that's how secrets work, isn't it? They feed you in small bites until you realize you've swallowed the whole thing. The second letter began sweetly, almost tender. "You look beautiful at service today. No one suspects a thing. I dream of the river every night. Calls to me like you do." It felt wrong to read it, like intruding on someone's sin. Yet I kept turning pages. Each envelope carried the same smell of dust and lilacs, my grandmother's scent. The handwriting changed over the years. Loops tighter, pressure heavier, like guilt pressing harder into the paper. At first, the words were harmless. Talk of sermons, harvest festivals, the color of the sky. Then slowly darker phrases slipped in. "He's starting to suspect. The money isn't where he left it. We'll have to meet by the river after dark." I remember whispering to the empty room, "No, you didn't." But she did, because the next letter left no room for hope. "He said he'd go to the police. He said he knew what we did." My mouth went dry. The paper shook in my hands. Each line was a confession, written in ink that refused to fade. The river was calm that night. He struggled, but the current did the rest. The current did the rest. That phrase echoed through my skull like a hymn twisted backward. I dropped the letter, and it fluttered onto the table, face down. My coffee had gone cold. The sun had barely risen. but the kitchen already felt like dusk. I didn't realize my mother was standing in the doorway until she spoke. "You found them." Her voice was flat, almost gentle. She didn't ask what I found, just that I had. I nodded. She walked closer, touched one of the envelopes with shaking fingers. "For 30 years I prayed you'd never see those," she whispered. When I asked why, she said, "Because once you read them, you can't unknow." Then she turned away, poured herself coffee with trembling hands, and left the room. The silence that followed was unbearable. Even the clock seemed afraid to tick. I waited until she went upstairs. Then I opened the last bundle. The ribbon nearly crumbled in my fingers. The final page was short. No date, just one line written so hard it cut into the paper. "The current took him, but it was my hands that pushed first." The words bled through the page, mirrored faintly on the blank sheet behind it, like the truth trying to escape. I sat there staring, every nerve buzzing, until I realized I was crying. Not loud, not messy. Just quiet tears that fell onto the wood grain and disappeared. Same way the river must have swallowed him. I wanted to burn the letters. God, I wanted to. But I couldn't, because the part of me that loved her, the grandmother who baked pies, who sang hymns off-key, needed to understand why. Why keep the proof? Why hide it but never destroy it? Maybe guilt isn't about erasing what you did. Maybe it's about forcing yourself to remember. I placed every letter back in the box, retied the ribbon, closed the lid, but it didn't feel closed. It felt like the house itself exhaled, as if those words had been waiting decades for someone to finally read them aloud. When I looked up, morning light was spilling through the curtains, pale and cold, and for a second I thought I saw movement at the window, just the reflection of water sliding past outside. But it felt like eyes. That's when I knew this wasn't over. The letters were only the beginning. The truth had been buried deep, but now the ground was shifting, and something someone wanted out. By sunrise, the letters felt heavier than the box that held them. Paper shouldn't have weight, but guilt does. It seeps into the fibers, turns memory into something solid. I found my mother in the kitchen, already awake, already pretending she hadn't been crying. Steam rose between us from her mug. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said, "He didn't drown, did he?" The mug clinked against the counter. She didn't look at me, just whispered, "You read them." I nodded, and something inside the house, maybe the pipes, maybe the past, groaned in reply. She sat down slowly, as if every bone ached. "I was 12, she said. "I heard them fighting by the river. I thought it was just another argument about money." Her eyes unfocused, seeing the night again. There was shouting, then a splash, then nothing. She rubbed her hands together as if trying to warm ghosts. When I ran outside, the moon was so bright I could see the ripples, and Harold was standing there dripping wet. He said, "Go inside, sweetheart. Your mother's crying." So I did. I wanted to ask 100 questions, but all that came out was, "Why didn't you tell anyone?" She laughed, a short, broken sound. "Because she told me God would punish me if I spoke." And I believed her. "You believe everything at 12. Her words hung in the air like mold, quiet, invisible, but you can smell the decay. I looked at her, and for the first time she seemed smaller than me, like the secret had eroded her inch by inch. 30 years of silence had carved lines deeper than age ever could. After she went upstairs, I opened the box again. The air around it felt colder, a faint sour smell, old ink and dust, like something beginning to rot. I noticed something I'd missed before, a folded newspaper clipping at the bottom. "Local mechanic drowns in fishing accident." There was a photograph, grainy, black and white, of my grandfather's boat overturned near the riverbank. But behind it, if you looked closely, you could see 2 sets of footprints in the mud. One small, one large, both leading to the water, only one set coming back. The caption said nothing about that. Of course it didn't. I called the county records office that afternoon. Most of the files from that year had been digitized. They said public access. I spent hours scrolling microfilm until my eyes blurred. Accidental drowning. Lack of evidence. Case closed. Every line smelled of convenience. Then, one name kept repeating in the old reports. Detective James Whitmore. Next to it, retired 1999. I found a phone number buried in an archived newsletter for the Sheriff's Department retirees. Part of me hoped it was dead, disconnected. It wasn't. A slow, tired voice answered. "This is Whitmore." "Detective," I said. "You worked a drowning back in '92. Henry Moore." Silence. Then, "Who's asking?" "I'm his granddaughter." Another silence, longer this time. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled, not from age but memory. "She came to me, you know. Your grandmother. Winter of '94. Baby in her arms." "My mother," I whispered. "Yeah," he said. "Begged me to close the case. Said her husband slipped, said the Lord took him. She was shaking so bad I thought she'd dropped the child." He exhaled, A thin whistle through old lungs. I wanted to believe her. Maybe I did. But the footprints. He trailed off. What about them? I saw 2 sets, both heading toward the river. Only one came back. The line went quiet except for his breathing. Then he said something soft, almost to himself. She wasn't evil, just desperate. I thanked him and hung up, though thank you felt like the wrong language. When I stepped outside, the sky was bruised purple, clouds rolling in from the hills. The river smelled of metal, cold, sharp, endless. I thought of her standing there 30 years ago, hands shaking, the water swallowing everything she loved and hated at once. I should have felt closure, but instead I felt movement, like something beneath the surface turning over. Secrets, after all, don't die. They ferment. And when the truth starts to rot, it doesn't stay buried for long. I thought I was done with the box, but the thing about truth is, once it starts talking, it doesn't stop. The day after I spoke with Detective Whitmore, I went back to the house. It felt different now, like the walls knew I'd broken a promise. The air was heavier, the floorboards softer under my steps, as if the house itself was exhaling. I wanted to see the letters again to prove to myself they were real. When I opened the box, something shifted inside, a thin envelope I hadn't noticed before. Inside it was a small cassette tape, the plastic cloudy with age. A piece of masking tape stretched across the front, written in my grandmother's handwriting, July 12, 1992. My fingers shook as I slid it into an old player I'd found upstairs. The play button stuck for a second, then gave way with a dull click. At first, there was only hiss, the sound of dust and time. Then of voices, muffled close like whispers behind a wall, a woman's breath ragged, a man's tone urgent low, too distorted to catch words but not the emotion. Fear has its own frequency, you can feel it even through static. I turned the volume down and leaned in. Fragments emerged like broken glass. Can't keep this up. He knows. Please, not again. Then silence. Then a sound I can't describe. Not violent, not loud, just final. A thud, a gasp, the rush of something vast and moving. The tape clicked to an end, and the room seemed to inhale. I sat there in the dark, the player still humming, the smell of dust thick in my throat. I didn't replay it. I couldn't. Whatever happened on that tape was more than proof. It was a confession preserved by accident. For a long time, I just stared at the machine. The orange light glowed like an unblinking eye. Somewhere outside, the river moved, steady and indifferent. I carried the cassette downstairs and placed it on the kitchen table beside the box. The house felt colder, as if the recording had let the past out. When my mother came home from town, she saw it instantly. Her face drained. "You found it," she said. I nodded. She sat down slowly, rubbing her arms. "I told her to destroy it," she whispered. "She said she would, but she never could. Why record it at all?" I asked. Her eyes flicked toward the window, toward the river she refused to look at for decades. She said she needed to remember the truth in case someone ever doubted her story, but she also needed to forget it to survive. We sat there until the light outside turned violet. Neither of us spoke. The tape sat between us like a third person at the table. Finally, Mom said, "You know what happened, don't you?" I said, "I think so. She wasn't evil," she whispered. "She was cornered." And suddenly I saw it all, not as headlines or letters but as people. A man drowning in debt and anger. A woman trapped between fear and faith. Another man who promised rescue and offered ruin instead. I realized then that our family's story wasn't just about death, it was about silence. Every generation inherits what the last one refuses to say. My grandmother carried the weight of what she did. My mother carried the weight of knowing. And now it was mine. That night I couldn't stay in the house. I packed the tape and letters into my bag and drove until the road curved beside the river. Moonlight silvered the surface, calm and endless. I stopped the car, stepped out, and let the cold air hit my face. From here the river looked almost gentle, a moving mirror. But I knew what slept beneath. I held the tape in my hand. For a moment I thought about throwing it in, letting the current take it like it had taken him. But the river doesn't erase things, keeps them. It remembers. So I put it back in my bag. The truth had waited 30 years to be heard. It could wait a little longer to be told. The tape stayed on the table all night. I didn't touch it, didn't even turn on the light. Just sat there listening to the rain and the faint hum of the refrigerator, wondering how something so small could carry so much weight. By morning I'd made a decision. Not out of anger, not even courage, just exhaustion. Silence had ruled this family long enough. I gathered everything, the box, the letters, the cassette, and laid them out like pieces of a puzzle finally allowed to breathe. Each item had its own gravity, the faded ribbon, the smell of ink, the hiss caught on tape. Proof of the thing none of us ever dared name. Mom came downstairs, eyes red from another sleepless night. When she saw the evidence spread across the table, she froze. "What are you doing?" "Ending it," I said. She looked older than I'd ever seen her. For a moment I thought she might stop me, but instead she nodded, slow, tired. "If you do this," she whispered, There's no taking it back. I know. At the police station, time seemed to move differently. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the air smelled of coffee and wet coats. A young officer led me to a room with beige walls and kind eyes that didn't quite hide curiosity. When I told him why I was there, he blinked twice, then brought in a supervisor. I placed the box on the table, the letters first, then the tape. They treated it like fragile glass. As they cataloged each item, I watched their expressions shift from skepticism to quiet awe. The detective in charge, a woman about my age, looked up. You're saying this connects to the Moore drowning in '92? Yes, I said. My grandparents. She studied me for a long moment, then pressed record on her own device. Tell me everything. I told her about the attic, the initials, the letters, the retired detective, about my mother's confession, about the river. When I finished, she exhaled like she'd been holding her breath the entire time. We'll reopen the case, she said, even if it's just for the record. Days turned into weeks. I expected nothing, too much time had passed. But then came the call. The handwriting was authenticated. The timeline matched. Harold Mason, listed once as a church volunteer, had disappeared within days of my grandfather's death, buried quietly in another county 3 years later. Everything lines up, the detective said. No one can be prosecuted now, but the truth stands. The truth stands. Such small words for something that can rebuild or destroy entire lives. When I told Mom, she cried, not the kind of crying that shakes you, but the kind that empties you. She whispered, her punishment wasn't prison. It was remembering. And maybe she was right. Maybe guilt had done the sentencing long ago. That evening, we cooked dinner together for the first time in years. The kitchen smelled of onions and rosemary. Music hummed low on the radio. It felt strange, peaceful. Not forgiveness exactly, just air finally moving through a room that had been sealed shut. Later, I went for a walk down to the river. The water was high from the rain, its surface dark but calm. I stood on the same bank where everything had ended and begun. The wind lifted, carrying the scent of wet earth and cedar. For the first time, it didn't feel like the river was keeping secrets. Felt like it was listening. I pulled the last letter from my pocket, the one that ended with, it was my hands that pushed first, folded it once, then twice, until it was small enough to fit between my fingers. The paper trembled in the breeze. I'm not hiding you anymore, I whispered. Then I let it go. The current caught it, turned it once, and drew it under. No drama, no splash, just release. As I walked back to the house, I realized the weight in my chest had changed. Still there, but lighter, like carrying something you finally understand instead of something you fear. Some truths don't need punishment. They just need air. The weeks after the investigation closed felt unreal. Life kept moving, but slower, like the air itself was learning how to breathe again. Mom stopped jumping every time the phone rang. She started leaving the curtains open, letting the morning sun spill across the kitchen tiles. Small things, but after decades of shadows, light felt radical. Sometimes we'd sit together in silence, two women who finally ran out of lies. No more stories to protect. No more pretending the past was holy. Just truth and whatever grew from it. She asked once, do you hate her? I didn't answer right away. Hate felt too easy. I don't know, I said finally. I think I just see her now. Mom nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. I found myself wandering through Grandma's house less like a mourner and more like an archaeologist. Every room a layer of her life. The hymn books worn at the edges, the apron still hanging behind the door, the smell of soap that never quite faded. She had loved deeply, that much was clear. She just loved wrongly, and then lived with it until it hollowed her out. One afternoon I caught Mom humming while folding laundry, a simple tune, off-key and sweet. It startled me. I couldn't remember the last time I'd heard her hum. That was when I realized she was lighter. The secret that had weighed on her since childhood was finally gone. Truth doesn't always heal, but it can stop the bleeding. I still dream of the river. In those dreams, it's never dark or cruel anymore. It's quiet, silver light rippling across the surface, like forgiveness pretending to be water. Sometimes I see her there, my grandmother, standing ankle deep, her hands clasped as if in prayer. She looks at me, mouth moving but no sound reaching shore. Maybe she's saying sorry. Maybe she's saying thank you. I always wake before I find out. Mom says the dreams mean peace. I think they mean understanding, which might be the same thing. We started a ritual, she and I. Every Sunday we drive to the bridge and throw wildflowers into the current. No prayers, no speeches. Just color on water disappearing downstream. It's not forgiveness, it's acknowledgement. One evening, as we watched the flowers drift, Mom said, do you think people can come back from the things they've done? I thought about Grandma, about guilt carving her into something fragile, about love turning to fear, about faith twisting into silence. I think they already try, I said. Every day they wake up and choose to keep living. That's coming back in its own way. She smiled at that. Small. Real. When we got home, the house no longer felt haunted. Still old, still creaky, but alive. As I locked the door, I noticed the faint outline on the shelf where the wooden box used to sit, a dust-free rectangle, a ghost of the ghost itself. I didn't clean it. Some absences deserve to stay visible. The silence now is different. Not the heavy kind that hides things, but the kind that listens. It fills the room softly, wraps around us like breath after confession. I used to fear silence because it meant something awful was waiting to be said. Now it feels like proof that everything has finally been spoken. Tomorrow I'll start packing. The house will be sold soon. Mom says she wants a place closer to town, closer to people. I think that's good. We've spent enough of our lives beside that river. The house is empty now. Boxes stacked by the door, walls echoing where pictures used to hang. When I walk through the rooms, my footsteps sound like someone else's memories. It's strange how silence changes when it finally belongs to you. I leave one window open. The wind moves through, cool and clean, carrying the smell of rain and the faint sweet trace of lavender. For the first time, it doesn't feel like her scent haunting me. Feels like goodbye. Mom waits outside in the car. She looks peaceful, older, yes, but lighter. I think she's finally forgiven herself for keeping the secret. Or maybe she's just tired of being afraid. Before locking the door, I walk to the kitchen and lay my hand on the spot where the box once sat. There's still a faint mark in the wood, dust refusing to settle evenly. I trace it with my fingertips and whisper, "It's done." Driving away, the road curves toward the river. It glints through the trees like a silver scar, endless and calm. I pull over by the bridge one last time. The current below murmurs in the same language it always has. Steady, patient, ancient. I lean on the railing and watch sunlight scatter on the surface. Every shimmer feels like a heartbeat. For years, I thought the river was cruel. Now I understand it only reflected what we gave it. We fed it our secrets, our fear, our silence, and it carried them faithfully until we were ready to listen. I drop a single wildflower into the water. It spins once, twice, then drifts away, a tiny piece of color swallowed by light. Not an offering, just acknowledgement. I think of everything that brought me here. The letters, the tape, the voices, the truths that refused to stay buried. And somehow it all feels smaller now. Not lighter exactly, just finally measured. People say truth destroys families. Maybe it does. But sometimes destruction is just the sound of walls collapsing so sunlight can get in. As I turn to leave, I glance down one last time. The water moves like time, forward, relentless, forgiving. And somewhere in that steady hush, I almost hear her voice again. Not crying, not pleading, just a whisper carried by the wind. "Thank you." I don't answer. I just close my eyes and let the sound pass through me. And for the first time since I opened that box, the silence that follows feels like peace.